The mountain had no name. It was too old for names. It had existed before the first dragon opened its eyes, before the first star fell from the sky, before time itself learned how to move forward. And at the very top of this ancient mountain, inside a cave made of crystal and shadow, lived Vaelithra. She was a dragon of the old blood. Her scales were the color of deep ocean water, shifting between blue and black depending on how the light touched them. Her eyes burned like two small suns, golden and ancient and filled with memories that stretched back 3,000 years. Her wings, when she spread them, could block out the sky itself. But Vaelithra did not fly anymore. She did not hunt. She did not breathe fire upon her enemies or collect treasures in her cave. Instead, she did something that other dragons found strange and disturbing. She watched humans. The human colony had arrived on Kithara 200 years ago. Their ships had fallen from the sky like metal seeds, crashing into the green valleys below the mountains. Vaelithra remembered that day clearly. She had watched from her crystal spire as the small creatures crawled out of their broken vessels, coughing and bleeding and crying. Other dragons had laughed at them. "They will die within the season," her brother Korath had said. "They are soft, they are weak, they are nothing." But they did not die. The first winter killed many of them. Vaelithra watched as they buried their dead in the frozen ground, their small bodies shaking with cold and grief. She expected them to give up then. She expected them to crawl back into their ships and fly away to find an easier world. Instead, they built fires. They cut down trees and made shelters. They wrapped themselves in animal skins and held each other through the long nights. And when spring came, there were fewer of them. But those who remained were stronger. Vaelithra found this interesting. The second year brought predators. The great hunting cats of Kithara, each one as large as a human dwelling, came down from the eastern forests. They were fast and clever, and very, very hungry. The humans had no scales to protect them, no claws to fight back, no fire in their throats. But they had something else. They had minds that never stopped working. They studied the cats. They learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. They built traps and weapons and walls, and by the end of that year, the humans were not the prey anymore. They were the hunters. Vaelithra found this fascinating. Years passed. Decades. Centuries. The human colony grew from a handful of survivors into a thriving city. They built towers that reached toward the sky. They created machines that could fly without wings. They developed medicines that could cure sicknesses and heal wounds that would have killed them before. And through it all, they kept dying. This was the part that Vaelithra could not understand. Humans lived such short lives. A century, if they were lucky. Most of them barely made it to 80 years. In the time it took Vaelithra to finish a single nap, entire generations of humans were born, grew old, and turned to dust. Yet they never stopped trying. She watched a young human girl lose her parents to a storm. The child had been 7 years old, alone in a world that seemed determined to destroy her. Any reasonable creature would have given up. Any sensible being would have accepted defeat. But this girl did not. She grew up in the colony's orphanage. She studied every book she could find. She worked harder than anyone around her. And 40 years later, Vaelithra watched that same girl, now a grown woman with gray in her hair, open the doors to the colony's first hospital. A building she had designed herself. A place that would save thousands of lives. The woman had taken her pain and turned it into purpose. Vaelithra had lived for 3,000 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched stars being born and worlds being destroyed. She had witnessed wonders that no human could ever imagine, but she had never done anything like that. Dragons were immortal, or close enough to it. They could live for 10,000 years if nothing killed them. They were powerful beyond measure, wise beyond counting, ancient beyond understanding. They had all the time in the world to accomplish great things. And yet, they accomplished nothing. Her brother Korath spent his days sleeping on his gold. Her sister Mithana had not left her cave in 400 years. The elder dragons, the rulers of their kind, did nothing but watch and judge and wait for something interesting to happen. They had forever. So they did nothing with it. Humans had almost no time at all. So they did everything they could. The realization struck Vaelithra like a bolt of lightning. She finally understood why she found these small, fragile creatures so fascinating. It was not their technology, or their buildings, or their strange customs. It was their fire, not the fire that dragons breathed. Something else, something deeper, a flame that burned inside them, pushing them forward, making them create and build and love and fight even though they always knew that death was waiting for them. Dragons had lost that fire somewhere along the way. Maybe it happened when they became immortal. Maybe it happened slowly, over countless centuries of having nothing to fear and nothing to lose. But it was gone now, and Velithra could feel its absence like a hole in her chest. She wanted it back. She wanted to feel what humans felt. She wanted to know what it was like to have a short life that actually meant something, instead of an endless life that meant nothing. She wanted to love with the knowledge that love could end. She wanted to create with the understanding that time was running out. She wanted to become human. The thought should have terrified her. It went against everything dragons believed. It was madness. It was betrayal. It was impossible. But as Velithra spread her wings and flew down from her crystal mountain for the first time in centuries, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt alive. She flew toward the ancient temple where the conclave of scales met once every 100 years. The elder dragons would hear her request. They would probably refuse. They would certainly mock her. But she would ask anyway, because that was what humans did. They asked. They tried. They failed. And then they tried again. Velithra finally understood why. The conclave of scales met in a place that existed between worlds. It was not a cave, or a mountain, or a temple. It was a space carved out of reality itself, where the oldest dragons gathered to discuss matters of great importance. The walls were made of frozen starlight. The floor was smooth obsidian that reflected nothing. The air tasted like thunder and old secrets. 12 elder dragons sat in a circle, their massive forms casting shadows that moved on their own. They were the oldest of their kind, each one over 8,000 years old. Their scales had faded to shades of gray and silver, and their eyes held the weight of countless centuries. In the center of this circle stood Velithra, feeling very small. "You wish to become human," said Aldrath the Ancient, the leader of the conclave. His voice was like stones grinding together, slow and deep and terrible. "We have heard your request. We find it amusing." Laughter echoed through the chamber. It was not kind laughter. "I am serious," Velithra said. She kept her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. "I have watched humanity for 200 years. I have seen what they can do. I want to understand them. I want to be one of them." "You want to become prey?" said another elder, a female dragon named Sithrix whose scales were the color of old bones. "You want to give up everything we are for the sake of creatures who live and die like insects." "They are not insects. They are nothing," Aldrath interrupted. "They are born, they suffer, they die. This is the full measure of their existence. Why would any dragon choose such a fate?" Velithra took a deep breath. "Because they do more with their short lives than we have done with our endless ones." Silence fell over the chamber, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. "Explain," Aldrath said, and his voice had grown cold. "When did any of us last create something?" Velithra asked. "When did any of us last build or discover or change? We have lived for thousands of years, and what do we have to show for it? We sleep, we watch, we wait, but we never act. We never grow. We simply exist, like stones at the bottom of a river, letting time flow over us. We are eternal," Sithrix said. "We do not need to rush, and that is exactly the problem. We have no urgency, no reason to do anything today, because we can always do it tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. It just stretches on forever, empty and meaningless." The elders exchanged glances. Some looked angry. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked almost sad. "You truly wish this?" Aldrath asked. "You understand that the transformation cannot be undone? That once you become human, you will be trapped in that form until you die, and you will die, Velithra. Quickly, by our standards." "I understand. Then we will grant your request." Velithra felt shock ripple through her. She had expected argument, mockery, refusal. She had not expected agreement. "However," Aldrath continued, and now his ancient eyes gleamed with something she did not like, "there are conditions. The right of transformation is not a gift. It is a bargain. The universe demands balance. To gain something, you must lose something of equal value." What must I lose? Everything that makes you a dragon. Aldrath began to list the prices, counting them off like items in a merchant's inventory. You will lose your immortality, your fire, your wings, your scales, your strength, your size. All of it will be stripped away. I expected as much. You will also lose your memories. Vaelithra felt her breath catch. My memories? All 3,000 years of them. You will be born anew as a human infant, with no knowledge of your former life. You will grow up believing you are human. You will live and age and eventually die as a human. You will never know what you truly are. This was harder to accept. 3,000 years of experience, of knowledge, of self, all of it erased. She would become a stranger to herself, but she thought of the humans she had watched. They did not need ancient memories to do great things. They created their own stories, built their own meanings, lived their own lives. Perhaps she could do the same. I accept, she said. Aldrath smiled, and it was not a kind smile. There is one more thing. You will inherit their curse. What curse? Feeling. The elder dragon leaned forward, his massive head filling Vaelithra's vision. Dragons feel things, yes, but we feel them at a distance. We are protected by our age, our power, our certainty. Humans have no such protection. They feel everything directly, immediately, overwhelmingly. Every loss cuts them like a knife. Every joy burns them like fire. Every moment matters because they know it will not last. Vaelithra remembered the human child who had lost her parents. She remembered the tears, the screaming, the bottomless grief in those small eyes. She had watched it from her mountain and felt only curiosity. What would it be like to feel that kind of pain? You will not watch suffering anymore, Aldrath said, as if reading her thoughts. You will live it. You will carry it inside you. And when you finally die, you will die knowing that everyone you ever loved is already gone or soon will be. For the first time, Vaelithra felt fear. True fear. Deep and cold and absolute. She could refuse. She could walk away. She could return to her crystal cave and watch the humans from safety, never risking anything, never losing anything, never feeling anything. She could live forever and be dead inside. I accept, she said again. The elders rose. Ancient magic began to swirl around the chamber, older than stars, powerful beyond measure. Vaelithra felt it pulling at her, tearing at the edges of her being. Then let the rite begin, Aldrath said. May you find what you are looking for, foolish child, and may you survive long enough to regret it. The magic consumed her. Pain beyond anything she had ever known ripped through every scale, every bone, every memory. She felt herself being unmade, piece by piece, thought by thought, year by year. The last thing she remembered, before the darkness took her completely, was the sound of Aldrath's laughter. Then there was nothing. And then there was a cry, small and helpless and human as somewhere on the surface of Kithara. A baby girl opened her eyes for the first time. They found her near the mountain pass, a woman with no memory and no name. She was perhaps 20 years old, with dark hair and golden eyes that seemed to catch the light in strange ways. She wore no clothes, had no belongings, and could not explain how she had survived in the wilderness alone. The settlers brought her to the colony and gave her a bed in the medical center. They asked her questions she could not answer. Where did you come from? Who are your people? What is your name? She did not know. Her mind was empty, like a room that had been cleaned of all its furniture. She knew how to speak, how to walk, how to eat, but she did not know who she was or where she belonged. A nurse named Helena took pity on her. We need to call you something, she said gently. What about Vera? It means truth. In an old Earth language. The woman with no memory smiled. It felt right somehow, though she could not say why. Vera, she repeated. Yes, I am Vera. Life in the colony was strange and wonderful. Everything was new to Vera, though she sometimes had the odd feeling that she had seen it all before, from very far away. She learned to work with her hands, helping in the community gardens. She learned to cook and clean and mend torn clothing. She learned that humans needed to sleep every night and eat 3 times a day and drink water constantly or they would die. Such fragile creatures, she sometimes thought. Then she would wonder why that thought felt so strange. Years passed. Vera grew comfortable in the colony. She made friends who invited her to dinner parties and birthday celebrations. She found work as a teacher, helping young children learn to read and write. She discovered that she had a gift for understanding people, for seeing past their words to the feelings underneath. When she was 25, she met Marcus. He was a pilot, one of the brave ones who flew supply ships between Cathara and the orbital stations. He was tall and loud and laughed at everything, especially his own jokes. He had scars on his hands from engine burns and a smile that could light up a room. "You have old eyes," he told her on their first meeting. "Like you have seen more than one lifetime." Vera did not know how to respond to that. It felt true in a way she could not explain. They fell in love slowly, the way rivers carve through stone. He took her flying in his ship, and she discovered that the sky felt like home even though she had never left the ground before. He introduced her to his family, a loud and chaotic group who welcomed her with open arms and terrible cooking. They married on a spring morning, with flowers in her hair and tears in her eyes. Those were the happiest years of Vera's life. She and Marcus built a house on the edge of town, with windows that faced the mountains. They had 2 children, a daughter named Lynn and a son named Thomas. Vera watched them grow from helpless infants into walking, talking, laughing people, and she understood for the first time why humans bothered with all of this. This is why, she thought as she held her sleeping daughter. This is why they keep going even when it hurts. Because love makes it worth it. But time moved differently now than it had before. Though Vera did not remember the before, the years seemed to fly past like birds, impossible to catch or hold. Her children grew up too fast. Her husband's dark hair turned gray. Her own body began to show signs of age lines around her eyes, aches in her joints, a tiredness that sleep could not cure. Marcus got sick when they had been married for 40 years. Cancer, the doctors said, deep in his lungs where they could not reach it. There were treatments, but they only slowed the disease. They could not stop it. Vera sat by his bed every day. She held his hand as he grew weaker. She told him stories about their life together, reminding him of the time he had crashed his ship into a lake and emerged covered in weeds, laughing at himself, reminding him of their daughter's first words, their son's first steps, all the small moments that had built their life together. "I am not afraid," Marcus told her near the end. His voice was thin as paper now. "I have lived a good life. I have loved and been loved. That is enough." "It is not enough for me," Vera whispered. "I want more time." Marcus smiled, and for a moment he looked young again. "That is what makes it precious, my love. If we had forever, none of it would matter. But we do not have forever. We only have now, and now, in this moment, I am with you. That is everything." He died that night, holding her hand. Vera had never known grief like this. It was not just sadness. It was a physical thing, a weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She cried for days. She stopped eating. She could not look at their house without seeing him in every corner. This is what the elders warned about. Something whispered in the back of her mind. But the thought made no sense to her, so she pushed it away. Her children saved her. Lynn and Thomas, now grown with children of their own, came to stay with her. They cooked meals she did not want to eat. They held her when she cried. They reminded her that Marcus was gone, but they were still here, and they needed her. So Vera kept living, not because she wanted to, at first, but because love demanded it. And slowly, day by day, the weight became easier to carry. The grief did not disappear, but it changed. It became part of her, woven into who she was. She could remember Marcus now without crying. She could tell stories about him and laugh. She could visit his grave and feel gratitude instead of only pain. 20 more years passed. Vera became a grandmother, then a great-grandmother. Her body grew old and tired. Her memory began to fade, and she spent more time sleeping than awake. She was 73 years old when she lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by family she barely recognized, and felt something shift inside her mind. It was like a door opening, a flood of light pouring in. Memories that were not hers except they were hers. They had always been hers. She had simply forgotten. 3,000 years of watching from a crystal mountain. Wings that could block out the sky. Fire that could melt stone. A bargain made in a chamber of frozen starlight. Violithra opened her eyes, and she remembered everything. The memories hit her like a flood. 3,000 years of watching from above. The crystal cave. The endless centuries of sleeping and waiting and doing nothing. And then the choice, the terrible, wonderful choice to become something smaller and weaker, and infinitely more alive. Vaelithra lay in the hospital bed, trapped in the body of an old woman, and felt 2 lifetimes pressing against each other inside her skull. She was Vera, the teacher, the wife, the mother. She was Vaelithra, the dragon, the watcher, the ancient one. She was both. She was neither, and she was angry, not at the humans, never at the humans. They had given her everything the elders had promised and so much more. They had given her love and loss and purpose. They had given her 70 years that felt more real than 3,000 years of emptiness. No, she was angry at her own kind. The elders had known. They had always known. The curse they spoke of was not a punishment, it was a gift. The ability to feel deeply, to love completely, to grieve honestly. These were not weaknesses. They were the very things that made life worth living, and dragons had thrown it all away. Vaelithra closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, searching for any trace of what she used to be. The transformation had been meant to be permanent, but magic was not as simple as the elders believed. After 70 years of being human, after 70 years of feeling and loving and grieving, something had changed. The power was still there, buried beneath layers of mortality. It was weak, barely a spark compared to the fire she once commanded. But it was enough. She pulled on that spark with everything she had. Pain ripped through her aging body. Her bones cracked and reformed. Her skin tightened, smoothed, then hardened into something that was not quite scales but not quite flesh. Her eyes burned as the golden fire returned to them. Her white hair darkened to black, then shifted to deep blue. When it was over, Vaelithra stood on legs that were young and strong again. She was not a dragon, she did not have wings or fire or the massive form she once wore, but she was not fully human either. She was something in between. A hybrid. A bridge. She looked at her reflection in the hospital window. A woman stared back at her, beautiful and terrible. Her skin had a faint shimmer, like light on water. Her eyes glowed like molten gold. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of thunder. "I am both now," she said to herself, "and I will make them understand." The nurses found her room empty an hour later. They searched the hospital, then the city, then the surrounding lands. But Vaelithra was already gone, flying across the sky without wings, carried by magic she had almost forgotten she possessed. She flew to the place between worlds where the conclave met. She tore through the barriers like paper, ancient protections crumbling before her rage, and when she landed in the center of that chamber of frozen starlight, the 12 elder dragons were already waiting. "So," Aldreth said, his ancient voice carrying a note of surprise, "you survived." "I did more than survive. I lived, and now you return to us, broken, as we predicted, ready to admit that humanity is everything you have forgotten how to be." Silence fell. The elders shifted uneasily. They had expected her to come back defeated, desperate to return to her old form. They had not expected this, a creature who stood before them without fear, with fire in her eyes that had nothing to do with magic. "You gave me 70 years, Vaelithra said. 70 years as one of them. Do you know what I learned?" "We know what you lost," Sithrix answered. "Your immortality, your power, your dignity. I lost nothing. I gained everything." Vaelithra began to pace around the chamber, her hybrid body moving with both human grace and dragon power. "I fell in love with a man who laughed at his own jokes and flew ships like a madman. I held my children when they were born, felt their hearts beating against mine. I watched them grow into people I was proud of. I buried my husband and learned that grief is just love with nowhere to go. Temporary pleasures," Aldreth said dismissively. "Soon forgotten, never forgotten. That is the point." Vaelithra turned to face him directly. "I remember every moment, every smile, every tear, every meal shared with friends, every quiet night reading stories to my grandchildren. I have 70 years of moments that mean something. What do you have, Aldreth? 8,000 years of sleeping in caves?" The great dragon's eyes flickered. Something moved behind them, something he had not felt in a very long time. Shame, perhaps, or the memory of shame, dulled by centuries of not caring. "You came here to mock us," Sithrix said. "Very well. You have mocked us. Now leave. I came here to wake you up. Vaelithra raised her hand, and power crackled between her fingers. Not dragon magic or human magic, but something new. A combination of both, fueled by everything she had experienced in her mortal life. I know why you let me transform, she said. You thought I would suffer. You thought I would return, broken by grief and pain, and beg to be a dragon again. You wanted proof that mortality was a disease, that humans were lesser beings, that your eternal indifference was the correct choice. And were we wrong? Aldrath asked, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Completely. You were catastrophically, fundamentally, absolutely wrong. The chamber trembled. The frozen starlight flickered. Something was happening that had not happened in 10,000 years. The elders were listening. Really listening. I did not come back broken, Vaelithra continued. I came back awake. For the first time in 3,000 years, I actually feel alive. And do you know what made that possible? Not power, not immortality, not ancient wisdom or magical strength. She stepped closer to Aldrath, close enough to see the dust that had gathered on his silver scales, close enough to smell the staleness of a creature that had not moved in centuries. Love made it possible. Loss made it possible. The knowledge that everything ends that made it possible. Humans do not live despite their mortality. They live because of it. Every moment matters to them because they know it will not last forever. She pulled back and addressed all 12 elders at once. You called it a curse. But it is not a curse. It is the most precious gift in the universe. And you gave it up. All those millennia ago, because you were afraid to feel it. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of creatures who were beginning to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. What do you want from us? Aldrath finally asked. Vaelithra smiled. It was a human expression, full of warmth and sadness and hope. I want you to remember what you lost, and then I want you to decide if you have the courage to get it back. Vaelithra stood before the conclave and told them the truth they had hidden from themselves for 10,000 years. You were not always like this, she said. I see it now, in the memories that return to me, the oldest stories, the ones we tell our young before they learn to be cynical, stories of dragons who built great cities and created art that made the stars weep. Dragons who loved so fiercely that their hearts could be heard beating across worlds. Dragons who lived short lives, yes, short even by human standards, but lives that burned so bright they left marks on the universe itself. Aldrath shifted on his ancient throne. Children's tales. Nothing more. They are history. Our history. Before the right of eternity was discovered. Before we chose to live forever. The words hung in the air like smoke. Several of the younger elders, young being a relative term for creatures over 5,000 years old, leaned forward with interest. This was not a story they had heard before. The right of eternity, Vaelithra continued, did more than extend our lives. It changed what we are. To live forever, we had to give up the very things that made living worthwhile. Our passion, our urgency, our ability to feel deeply and connect truly. We traded our fire for our immortality, and we have been cold ever since. You speak of ancient magic, Sithric said carefully. Things that were done before any of us were born. Yes, and none of you questioned it. None of you wondered why we spend centuries sleeping, why nothing excites us anymore, why we watch younger species struggle and feel nothing but contempt. You accepted emptiness as the price of eternity. You forgot that there was ever another way. Vaelithra walked to the center of the chamber, where the frozen starlight pooled like water. She knelt and touched it, and the light responded to her hybrid nature warming, shifting, becoming something new. Humans are what we used to be, she said softly. They carry the fire we abandoned. They feel what we have forgotten how to feel. They are not lesser beings who burn out too fast. They are our past, our potential, our reminder of everything we sacrificed. Images began to form in the warming light. Human images. A mother holding her newborn child for the first time, tears streaming down her face. A scientist working through the night to find a cure for a disease that killed his daughter. An old couple dancing in their kitchen, laughing at nothing and everything. A young man writing poetry that he knows no one will read, because the act of creation is its own reward. This is what you call weakness, Vaelithra said. This is what you mock and dismiss. But look at it. Really. Look. The elders watched. For the first time in millennia, they truly watched. They know they are going to die, Velithra continued. Every single one of them knows that their time is limited, and instead of giving up, instead of falling into despair, they choose to love anyway. They choose to create anyway. They choose to hope anyway. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength in the universe. She stood and faced Aldrath directly. The rite of transformation was meant to punish me. You wanted me to suffer as a human and return broken, proving that your way was correct. But the real price of transformation was not what I paid. It was what I discovered. And what did you discover? Aldrath asked. His voice was different now, smaller, almost frightened. That you have been paying the real price every day for 10,000 years. The price of not living, the price of not feeling, the price of existing without meaning. You are not immortal, Aldrath. You are already dead. You just have not stopped moving yet. The words struck the elder dragon like physical blows. He recoiled, his ancient eyes widening. And in those eyes, Velithra saw something she had never expected to see: recognition and grief. I remember, he whispered. I remember what it was like. Before the rite, before the emptiness. His voice broke, and for the first time in 8,000 years, Aldrath the Ancient wept. I had a mate, children. I loved them so much it hurt, and when the rite was offered, I thought if I lived forever, I would never have to lose them. But you lost them anyway, Velithra said gently. You lost them the moment you stopped being able to feel. They are gone now, and you cannot even grieve them properly. That is the true curse of immortality. One by one, the other elders began to stir. Memories long buried were rising to the surface. Faces they had forgotten, names they had not spoken in millennia. The ghosts of who they used to be. Is there a way back? Sithrix asked, and her voice trembled like a child's. Can we undo what was done? I do not know, Velithra admitted. The rite of eternity is powerful magic, but I am proof that change is possible. I am both dragon and human now. I carry the fire and the wisdom, the feeling and the memory. If I can transform, perhaps others can too. She turned to address all of them one final time. I am not asking you to become human. I am asking you to become dragons again. Real dragons. The kind that existed before fear made us choose safety over meaning. The kind that lived short, brilliant lives full of love and creation and purpose. It will hurt, Aldrath said. To feel again after so long. It will hurt beyond anything we can imagine. Yes, Velithra agreed. It will hurt, but it will also be real. And real is better than empty. Trust me, I have lived both ways now, and I know which one I choose. She spread her arms, and the hybrid power within her pulsed like a heartbeat. The humans are spreading across the galaxy. They are building, exploring, failing, trying again. They could use allies who understand what it means to struggle, to lose, to keep going anyway. They could use friends who remember that every moment is precious. You want us to join them? Sithrix asked in disbelief. I want you to learn from them. As I did. Let their fire remind you of your own. Let their courage teach you how to live again. She began to walk toward the chamber's exit, her hybrid form glowing with inner light. I am going back to them now. I have perhaps 50 years left in this body, and I intend to make every single one of them count. You can stay here in your frozen starlight, sleeping through eternity. Or you can follow me and remember what it means to be alive. She paused at the threshold and looked back one final time. The choice is yours, but I hope you choose well. I would hate for you to miss the best parts. Then she was gone, flying back toward the human settlements, back toward the short and beautiful life she had chosen. Behind her, in the chamber between worlds, 12 ancient dragons sat in silence, and for the first time in 10,000 years, they began to think about tomorrow not as an endless repetition of today, but as a chance to become something new. 300 years later, the history books would call it the Great Reawakening, the moment when dragons began choosing mortality again, giving up their eternal emptiness for short lives full of meaning. They joined humanity's expansion across the stars, bringing ancient wisdom and newly recovered hearts. And whenever anyone asked why, The dragons would tell the story of Vaelithra, the watcher who became human, who learned that the price of living forever was never really living at all. The story always ended the same way. She showed us the truth, they would say. A life with an ending is the only life worth living. And now, finally, we are alive.